Then moving on to domestic succession. So we have a situation here where we've got the set of facts that we had previously. And in this situation, we have Li Wei who passes away. He dies. So the first question we have here is, what is the basis and application of Chinese succession laws? Secondly, whether China, or does China succession law include forced heirship rights? And then, is it possible to agree to vary inheritance rights? And then finally, does China succession law allow any testamentary freedom? So again, we'll call on you, Frank, to answer these questions.
All right, sure. For the first question, in terms of application of PRC law, there are two factors here. Number one is a domicile of the deceased. So if Li Wei domicile is China, then the PRC law will apply. Then another factor is even if his domicile is in, let's say, in the US or somewhere else, but he's got real estate in China, then the governing law with respect to those such real estate could be the PRC law. Then number two, does China's succession law include forced heir rights? Yes. So the PRC law provides that if you fail to leave enough assets for any of the heir that do not have source of income and they do not have the work capacity. For instance, they are children, they don't have the capability to work, and they do not have source of income, or they are disabled. They cannot work, and if they do not have source of income, so the law provides that you must leave estate for such heir. And also such rights include fetus. So the fetus in the womb, so you must leave shares for them.
Okay.
Yeah. And number three, is it possible to agree to vary inheritance rights? Yeah, so the typical way of doing it by a will and/or a gift agreement. So you can give it, you can leave all of your assets to somebody, either as your heir or your friends, provided that you do not violate the rule for the forced heir rights.
Frank, on that forced heir right, is there a percentage specified that if you do have disabled children or underage children, is there a percentage that the law provides that you need to leave, or is it left open to the parties to agree?
Yeah, actually, no. There's no particular threshold or percentage that is provided under the law. So it all depends on the case. It's within the discretion of the judge.
Right. But otherwise, there's just full testamentary freedom, except for this one area of looking at effectively dependents, disabled dependents or underage dependents. You can't disinherit them. You have to provide for them. That's correct, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Right. Okay.
So I guess that answers the fourth question as well. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have some more questions in this situation. The first one is, does China succession law permit or allow heirs to claw back assets that have been transferred into a foreign trust? And then, does Hong Kong trust law provide protection against an inheritance or succession clawback claim in China, and also what happens to the indirect shares of the 30% in that company that's held by a trust in a Chinese trading company?
Well, for the first question, we haven't had any cases or precedents in court with respect to clawing back from assets from trust, not even domestic trust, not to mention foreign trust. So we don't have rules or precedents regarding this, but based on the practice, we know it will be very rare for a PRC court to make a ruling like this. For one thing is they don't want to make any rulings over assets or trust outside of China. Number two, for the concept of clawing back, it's again, it's unprecedented. So we'll have to look at the case and it will be determined by court on a case-by-case basis. So the second question is about Hong Kong law, right? So that's something I would love to learn, maybe Sam.
Yeah, I mean, the clawback from a Hong Kong perspective, Hong Kong and Singapore have similar provisions on this. They're not identical. So the Hong Kong provision is a bit more modernized than the Singapore version, but it would basically seek to resist and protect the trust from inheritance and succession claims in this way. So it wouldn't have a good airing in Hong Kong on that basis. Even if the court were to make a exceptional clawback claim, it wouldn't be successful in Hong Kong, generally speaking, because they have these anti-forced heirship protections against the trust being attacked.
Yes, and I think that it may not necessarily be based on Chinese succession law. It's more likely to be, depending on whether or not the family members are beneficiaries of the Hong Kong Trust. So, if, for example, if the children are beneficiaries of the Hong Kong Trust, then their claim from the trust is more likely to be as beneficiaries of the trust rather than through their rights under Chinese succession law, I think. Okay, and Frank, have we covered the Chinese company in China?
Yeah, for the third question, I think the answer is no as well. If the trading company is owned by a trust, now if the trading company is owned directly by the deceased, and that would be a different story.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, some more questions in relation to this situation where Li Wei has passed away. The first one is, which succession law would apply to the US company and US assets? Which succession law will apply to the US real estate, Chinese or American? And is there any state and or federal estate tax implications from a US perspective? So I think we'll be looking to you, John, to answer some of these questions.
Yeah, I'll start. I think the answer, as I briefly mentioned a little earlier, it's going to be a state-by-state determination, and we're going to look at where the shares are located. Potentially, you're looking at where the company that's doing business that issuing the share is, if there is a contention. And contention really is at the heart of what we're analyzing here. Is there a conflict in the way that that state's law is treating the succession of those shares versus the way that China would? Or is there a member of the family that's raising an issue and challenging it? Absent that, there, I would say, more likely would be a deferral approach taken with the shares as movable property from a U.S. perspective. Now you move over to the land, I think the presumption shifts a bit more towards immovable property, probably the U.S. succession law, unless there is a conflict there that somehow has a facts and circumstances that would resolve itself in favor of in favor of the determination that was made under Chinese law, which there may not have been if I understood Frank's approach about trying to enforce an order on overseas property. On the last point about state or federal estate tax implications, the answer there is yes, there can be. And I think this is something a lot of folks don't realize or understand. They think of US estate tax as applying to US persons or people domiciled in the US. That's not fully true. It's not the only application. US estate tax applies to US situs assets, and that would include these company shares and the land. There's a very small exemption for non-US persons that would be exposed to this, only $60,000 US. Anything above that, subject to a 40% US estate tax. That's the bad news. The good news is, with some proper planning ahead of time, you can effectively block the imposition of that by holding these assets not directly in the name of a non-US person, but through a properly established and run offshore company. And then the last thing I'll mention that connects to the succession law along that same point of planning, any type of different treatment under the law, we would hope, would have been handled with good planning ahead of time. I know Dr. Gong's firm and my firm often work together with clients like Li-Wei, who will think ahead. Okay, here's how I want this to pass, and do the proper will and testamentary planning. That allows counsel from the US and China to think ahead about potential conflicts and try to resolve those through testamentary power to the full extent possible.
That's very good. Thanks, John. I was actually going to just ask you that question, whether a will in the US may help to clarify the position. So thank you very much for that.